I wasn't hooked up to my YouTube, so I don't know if
Oh,
I'm supposed to do anything on my side of it.
you shouldn't have to. So the way I built this, in theory, is it should automatically receive the stream keys. So I've run this before. Yep, mine just showed up. See if
All right.
yours did as well.
Oh, there we go.
See?
I see us.
Magic.
Okay, so oh, looks like you're already. Click here to start streaming. Go live. We are live. Are we good?
Fantastic.
But we're on YouTube. I just don't know. I guess we're doing everything good. I've never.
You
Okay, let
should
me.
be live.
Yeah. It says I have a big red button that says end stream if I want to end it. Chat. I think I can chat with myself.
Fantastic. Yeah,
Hello.
this might be the better way than OBS. Let me shut it down so it's not running in the background. Burns a ton of
Oh,
resources. There we go. Okay. That was my way to hear myself, though, apparently. Cool.
okay, so I think we're good. Whether we have anybody watching us or not doesn't even really matter. It's
No.
more of the experience.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe someday in the future we'll have hundreds of thousands of subscribers.
Right? That's
Yeah.
cool, I think, is someday in the future. But who knows?
Okay, so assuming people will watch this later, not as a live stream, but just just out of curiosity, the topic is kind of twofold.
Mhm.
If you don't mind, I would like to know just a little bit about your experience of sort of deconstruction, and if you
Sure.
don't mind sharing a little bit about that, and then we can kind
Yeah.
of get to the topic at hand, which was sort of just so people know. Chris had commented on one of my videos about knowing, like, having an answer, because I was kind of asking why do apologists, specifically, big name guys, I'm not going
Yeah.
after little guys, but big name guys, like, say, William Lane Craig. He's very intelligent, he's written books, he studies, he knows. So when he says something that's obviously not true, he can't I don't believe he doesn't know that he's not being deceptive. Like, he might have a justification, but okay, so let's get to that in a second.
Yeah.
In the meantime, maybe introduce yourself and tell me a little bit about what you feel comfortable with your story, because I'm curious about it, and I know this is a topic
Sure.
people really like to hear about.
Yeah, it's I wish I had a really cool story. That's always one of those things, it's like when you break an arm or something, you want to have like a really cool story for why you did it, but instead you were like carrying laundry up the stairs or something.
Yeah, and you just tripped.
Yeah.
You weren't riding a
So,
motorcycle and jumping
yeah.
over a river.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, but it is something. Yeah. So for me personally, I was an evangelical pastor for over a decade.
Okay.
I grew up in the church. I grew up in what was really like a young Earth creationist kind of viewpoint. Initially, I went to a Christian school for a large portion of my schooling, and I was from a fairly young age just completely indoctrinated into that
Yeah,
belief from all angles.
sure. So
So yeah.
family, culture, extended
Oh
family. Do
yes.
you, do you mind telling, like, maybe not where exactly, but like what region of the country? Like, was it
Yeah. So
Southwest?
I grew up in the Northwest.
Okay.
So yep, I grew up in the Northwest, and that was, it was identity. It was entirely our identity.
Hmm.
It was everything about who we were. I remember one particular time, my parents grounded me because I got a C in a class. I hadn't turned a bunch of papers in. That was actually
Huh.
the real issue. And my punishment was literally I could not leave my room except for like food and bathroom normal stuff. And the only thing I was allowed to do was read my Bible. That's it.
Okay.
Um, that's how extreme we were.
Yeah.
Just to kind of put that out there.
Sure. Sure.
Yeah,
And did you have a lot of siblings, or a big extended family?
not a crazy amount. No, there's just four of us.
Okay. Well, I
So
mean,
yeah,
not a tiny. I
right.
I have five siblings, so we were also
Yeah,
raised in the church, and it was just a normal thing to, so every
yeah.
Sunday you went to church, that kind of thing.
Yep. That
And
was us.
I'm assuming this was your experience started basically from birth, right? Or was it
Oh
later?
yeah. I
Okay.
don't
So
remember a time
yeah.
before, and my mom, would tell like people at the church would tell stories about when they held me as a baby. So
Okay.
like, yeah,
Sure.
and it was the same church, by the way, for like the first large chunk of my life.
Yeah.
So it wasn't even like we branched out. It was really in that one direction. So
And when you decided to go into the ministry, did you go to a specific school for this, or
So I
training?
did. I did go through a few things. So it was non-denominational is where we grew up, but it was really very close to the Assemblies of God. So
Okay.
that was probably the closest denomination that we were. Most of the pastors were actually licensed through there. So I went through like a sub school that the assemblies had because at the time I was working full time and had two kids.
Okay.
And so for me, I didn't have the time to go to seminary like off somewhere. So
Sure.
what I went through was essentially their deeper course for like missionaries and stuff that they created. But I'd already had a large amount of background in the church. This was at the recommendation of a couple of pastors that were my mentors because I had a pretty sizable leap on the average intro seminary student as far as my knowledge base at that point.
Okay.
So yeah, so I
Well,
went through that.
I have a question about that
Yeah.
because I just watched. There's a popular video that came out not too long ago called "Satan's Guide to the Bible," and it's
Oh, I
a
loved
very
it.
a very well done a very well done
Yeah.
animation. And one of the and they interview some big people like Bart Ehrman, and
Yep.
one of the things he says is pastors that go to seminary, like Princeton or whatever, they
Mhm.
all know a lot of stuff. So the theme of the video is your pastor's lying to you because he knows all these things and he doesn't tell
Yep.
you. Now, in my experience, so I was Assemblies of God and then later into the Vineyard, what very similar charismatic movement, young earth creationist. And I took a course. A college professor from Texas came to Hawaii. So this is the time I was living on Maui, and a lot of people love to come speak on
Yeah.
Maui, obviously,
Of course, right?
including the biggest speaker. Well, there was two big speakers. Rodney Howard Brown came, and the brother of Benny Hinn. I can't remember his first name, but
Mhm.
Benny Hinn's little brother came and
Okay.
gave his testimony. And so a lot of people would show up at Assemblies of God Maui because who doesn't want to go to Maui, right? Well, this
Exactly.
particular guy was a young earth creationist teacher, like a professor, and he kind of sparked me to want to go to Bible college and get into the ministry. And so back to what my question for you is,
Mhm.
when you don't go through like one of these big schools, do you think that some of that stuff isn't taught? Like you
Oh,
don't
absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, yeah, no. So, some of the things that you miss when you don't go through the big seminary schools is that in-depth study of the source text and some of the things that a lot of guys go through, like literal, like Hebrew and Greek
Mhm.
language training and various different components like that. Just kind of depends on what you're actually looking for. So, when you don't go to those traditional, like Princeton or Dallas Theological or one of these guys, you are missing a lot of that.
Okay, sure. Well,
But
I'm assuming
that's
you didn't learn Hebrew, right? Like
no, no,
well, I did a
no,
video a few weeks ago about like why doesn't Mike Winger know Hebrew? Like my
right?
question is not him specifically, but in general, because I had watched a video with this Rabbi Tobias Singer who appears on Myth Vision, and I watched
Oh
some
yeah,
of his stuff. He's very intelligent. I disagree with him, like he's a Jew in believing in God, like he's a theist. Like I don't agree with that,
right.
but he has some very strong arguments why Christianity can be shown to be false from the thing. And one of the things he
Yeah.
talks about is why don't Christians send their kid? They might learn Latin or German or Spanish. Why don't they learn Hebrew? Like they're saying the Bible's so important, and if you look at a Bible, it's like this much New Testament and there's this much Old Testament. Wouldn't you want
Yeah.
to? And his reasoning, which seems logical to me, is they as an institution, when I say they, but I mean in general, it's like if you send your kids to Hebrew school, they're going to start learning things and realize that, and there's going to be some tough questions. Did you ever come to that realization, or did you like can you remember back when you were like the most on fire for Jesus and the most passionate? Did you ever think to yourself, like, maybe I don't know some of this stuff because it's in Hebrew? Because I don't
Mm.
ever remember thinking that myself. I never thought that.
Uh, I don't think so. So I did study the original Hebrew a lot through the various different resources, and most pastors have access to something like Logos or
Mhm.
something along those lines. Some pretty deep. This was before we just had the internet for everything.
Sure, sure.
Um, so we had access to that. Now you can get it from Bible Gateway or any of these kind of places you can go online.
Right.
Uh, but you could look at the original text
Uh-huh.
and then basically look for the meanings of the words that way. You didn't have to speak Hebrew as long as you could trust that you were getting something. So
Sure,
get the
sure.
dictionary definitions, go through. But I never used that to question things. I used that to confirmation bias bolster my own opinion.
Sure.
That's what I always did.
Yeah.
And so and I'm not saying that like it was a conscious thing, right? I'm not saying like I purposefully mishandled this. No, it was just looking back. Most things that I did at those times, they were following the same script. Some of the stuff that we'll get into a little bit later.
Sure. No, no. I remember listening to guys like Chuck Missler, who was, I don't know if he was Calvary Chapel, but that's how I kind of know him through the
Yeah,
Calvary Chapel kind of stuff. And he would have things like, well, if you take this verse, it's like, it's a prophetic thing about Jesus, like the Son of Man is this and this and this and this, and you're like, wow, that's so amazing. They,
yeah,
and I listened to stuff about, he taught it like about from Genesis 6 4, like the Nephilim, and like later in my life, I would have actual, friends that were Christians are like, wait a minute, you actually believe in UFOs might be Nephilim? I'm like, well, yeah, Chuck
yeah.
Missler's really smart. And then I started thinking, well, yeah, okay, maybe some of these beliefs are a little bit out there. Did you start moving away from young earth creationism and some of the more like the more kind of I hate to use the word outrageous, but they are kind of like outrageous claims about science and stuff
Yeah.
before you started questioning like your faith, or was it sort of all
Yeah.
mixed together?
That's probably honestly that's a great spot to kind of like talk about where I stepped into deconverting because
Okay.
I didn't know, and most people that talk about deconstructing, most people they don't you don't go at this and like let's deconstruct.
Right.
It's not what you do.
Sure.
What typically happens is you begin to have some questions, and oftentimes you don't even realize you're moving through a process like this until you're through it,
Yeah.
and on the other side, and then you're sitting there staring and going, "What do I actually believe?"
Right.
Which is a lot of fun.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and you have I mean, at least for me, I had a lot of like tension and fear about it
Mhm.
because
Oh yeah.
it's 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 not easy to throw away. Like, and now I actually became a born again evangelical at 10 years old, not at birth, but it was
Mhm.
still very strongly ingrained in me, including like I wanted to go to Bible college, I wanted to
Oh
minister
yeah.
to people, and I was never a professional, but I was in lay leadership, and
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
like definitely. So did you feel? I don't know. I'll let you speak about it. But
Sure.
what was the emotions going on, like in terms of like fear or second guessing?
So at first, none, because it wasn't my intention in addressing some of these things I had questions on was really to solidify my faith. It was
Hmm.
to look at these things and say, if this is true, then what do I believe about this, or how do I then reconcile this biblical passage over here? So
Yeah.
for me, yes, getting away from some of those maybe young Earth creationist ideas in which the Earth is only 6,000 years old, that we have to ignore evolution, that we have to, or somehow create some hyper evolution, or that we have to begin to try to fit science into the Book of Genesis, which is very difficult, um,
Yeah.
really impossible. Uh, but when you had to try to do that and twist these things to try to figure out what it is, I got to that point where I was like, this is really difficult to twist and
Yeah.
go through this. And also, most people don't think this way and they don't believe this. And as
Right.
a pastor, I'm having to talk to people that have various different types of beliefs, which then led me to, well, why do I believe what I believe? And
Yeah.
so that was really where I started walking through, stepping away from some of those more extreme positions of young Earth creationism, or some of the kind of hyper grace ideas or hypo grace ideas with
Yeah.
with Calvinism and all
Well,
all the various different pieces.
was
Yeah.
this more like in the last year or two, or did this process? Do you feel like it started many, many years ago?
Well, if I look back, it started many years ago. I would not have known that during,
Okay,
but
fair enough. Fair enough.
and there was no point in time until maybe about a year ago or so. There was actually, well, it's almost 2 years now. There was not really a point in time in which I would have said, at this point, I'm now not a believer. And
Sure.
and even when I came out and said I don't think I have faith, I didn't sit there and say I'm an atheist. I don't have belief anymore.
Right.
I said, now what? I don't know what to do.
But yeah,
So yeah,
you're wondering what it means. Like I remember
right.
feeling the same thing. I actually remember. I mean, this is going to sound really bizarre, but I actually remember praying to Satan because I was so mad, and
Yes.
I said, okay, I don't really believe, but I might be wrong. And Satan, if you show up, I'll serve you. I mean,
Yeah.
I so want proof that if you show up right now, I will do what you say. Like I'll be a full-on Satanist. Like I don't care if it's evil. I just want to believe. Like I want something that I can grab and put my hands on. Now,
Yep.
of course, Satan didn't show up. I mean, I guess Christians would say he did, but you didn't see him. But but
Yeah.
it was an honest cry. So I think when people say that, oh, you just wanted to sin, or you just had a problem, or you just
Right.
hated God, they don't. They're. Then this is why I did that big video with Elisa Childers and Tim Burnett, and I
Yeah.
was really mad at them, and I'm still mad at them. I think they're very I think their position is very evil. It's mean because it dehumanizes and it disregards what we went through. I love Jesus. Like if
Yeah.
Jesus had showed up and actually saved me and done something tangible, I would probably be even more of a hyper Christian.
Sure.
I would probably have sold everything I could and served him and gone to Bible cooler or whatever he told me. I would have done it. So it's very hurtful. This is the one thing that makes me mad when people say, "Oh, you weren't really a Christian." I
Yeah.
mean, come on. Now, have you got that? Have you experienced that, like in online or in real life, or
So it's weird for me because I haven't been openly out as an atheist for very long. So I've only been openly out as an atheist for a few months. I
oh wow.
Right, right.
Well,
So
thanks
yeah,
for announcing it to the world with me. I
you're
appreciate.
welcome.
I mean, that's that.
Uh,
Well, I mean, it's a big trust, and
yeah,
it's. I know that's a scary thing. I mean,
it is very much, and so it's been a process going through with my family, and
uh
as you can imagine, with extreme religious family, that's not been a pleasant process at all. So but negating my personal issues, yeah. So it's not something where I decided to very quickly come out with these pieces and start making this a loud proclamation. But
sure,
I was right there with you once I hit that point in which I had kind of come to enough ideas, and through that process hit that point of saying I don't think I have faith.
mhm.
From that point, yeah, I did the same thing. I prayed to Satan. I prayed to God. I was like, when do you show up? Like,
Yeah,
you
well,
want to
because
prove something.
you want some
Yeah,
tangible proof, right? Because
right.
you feel like, at least for me, I felt like I've been tricked and lied to,
Yes.
right? Like you guys, you people that I trusted, I mean, close friends that I trusted, you guys were lying to me. Now, maybe not maliciously. I'm not saying they were. I mean, I have a lot of grace because I see they went through the same thing I went
Yeah.
through, right? They were raised or told as kids, but nevertheless, and then this comes back to our topic of, but some of these guys are lying and they know they're lying,
That's the
and that
challenge.
should really make us mad because if
Yeah.
Christianity is true, it should stand on its own without lies, without manipulate, without Greg Kokel's tactics. We shouldn't have to
Yeah.
have tactics,
Right.
right? I
Right.
mean, you agree with that? Like,
I agree. The sun's going down, so I apologize if this blinds
oh,
anybody, but I'm going to turn my lighting on
oh, no worries.
finally. I
Yeah,
wasn't
no,
able
that's
to
fine.
have my lighting on because the sun was glaring through my windows so brightly. Um, awesome. So now I can actually see a little bit better. Uh, yeah, no, absolutely. I'm with you. That some people do seem like they are actually lying, and I'm going to just be upfront with you and say I don't necessarily have an answer for everyone. I'm not going to
Mhm.
sit here and say I can tell you for certain if somebody's actually lying or not.
Yeah.
But I think I can walk through a couple things here, and I wrote some notes down.
Okay.
And even biblically, I think I can show why some of these people really stand on the things they stand on, and why to their own individual selves they don't see it as lying. They truly don't think they're lying in any way, shape, or form,
Okay.
which is crazy. It's
Yeah.
crazy. But this is what we call cognitive dissonance, the ability to
Sure.
hold two opinions that are diametrically opposed, right?
Yeah.
And that's something that's very strange, very bizarre. So yeah, but yeah, for me that was part of the whole issue. Deconverting was really walking through a lot of this stuff. It was deconstructing ideas, it was breaking down some of these concepts, and then you're right, at the end you kind of sit there and go, I was lied to. Like
Yeah.
I mean, even if it was unintentional, right? And I don't sit here and I don't blame my parents for the upbringing I had. I don't.
Yeah.
They weren't mean about any of it. It wasn't like it was some crazy ideas that being pushed on me or anything. But they were victims of the same idea that's been perpetuated for a long time, and it's really it's
Well, sure.
invasive.
If we go back to our parents and our parents' generation, especially in
Yeah.
the States, not believing in God was like almost unheard of. Like, I mean, I'm
Oh
not saying
yes.
I'm not saying there weren't atheists, but as in terms of public discourse, and of course, this is way before YouTube and internet and Reddit and so forth existed. So if you were questioning yourself, in the 60s or 70s, unless you're hanging out with hippies and free love, you might keep your mouth shut
Yeah.
about these questions.
Yeah.
So we definitely live in a newer in a newer world, which I think is
Right.
good. And I think
Yeah.
the access to information is good. And I think that's being reflected in the changing demographics, and that yeah, I think it's triggering a lot of fear. And well, you hear it when you listen to people like Elisa Childers and Tim Burnett on their book
Yeah.
tour. You hear the fear that they have, and I think the fear is there was a video, I want to say it was from Dark Matter, who says the reason people react is because when you reject God, you're actually rejecting them, because God's a reflection of themselves. So when you say I don't believe God, what you're really saying is I don't believe in you, I'm rejecting you. And people, that's scary. I mean, it's and it also makes people think, well, if you find this not believable, that says something about me. So they sort of have to double down on, no, it's really true. And they have to have an
Yeah.
excuse of why you did what you did. Or the worst one is you don't really believe. I mean, the worst one is you're not really an atheist, like, because God exists. You have to know God exists
Yeah.
because it's obvious, like, and you believed in
Of
God. So
course you do.
yeah, of course you do. Right. It's just a phase, or
Yeah.
you're feeling bad.
I've had a few of those interactions where people are like, "This is a phase. You're going to get over it," and it's like, "This isn't a phase. Like, this is something that took me a long time to come
Yeah.
to." And I've told people multiple times, I, this wasn't like a end goal for me. I didn't go out seeking to be an atheist,
Yeah.
and it wasn't a happy goal for me either. This wasn't something where I was thrilled to find this to be the answer. I wanted
Right.
to reestablish my faith. I wanted to believe
Yeah.
undoubtedly that God was
Oh,
real. I
oh,
wanted these things, and so yeah, it's
I
rough.
had, excuse me a sec. I had to call
Hmm.
my son because I had 400 sleeping pills and a fifth of vodka, and
Mm,
I was
yeah,
done. I had to call, like, this is a call
yeah,
you never want to make to your child. Like,
right,
I'm on the phone with him saying, I am done. I'm checking out. I could not handle all of the turmoil, the betrayal, all the things I was feeling, at that time feeling rejected by God. I mean, that was my
right,
first thing. Like, God's rejected me. Like, why does God hate me? And I had an uncle who told me, who happened to be an atheist. He said, "Look, you need to decide if you hate God or don't believe God exists. Like, pick a lane." And I, like, okay, I get that is logical.
yeah,
Like, I can't. There was a tension there, but this to go back to what you're saying, this is not easy.
right.
Like, coming out of that is not like, oh, you just decided to break up with your girlfriend or something.
Yeah,
Um,
it's
so
not. It's not. It's
did
not
did
simple.
did you find, okay, I'll tell another quick story. When I came out, so I lived in
Yeah.
Orange County, California. I didn't have any friends. And so I went online, like, how do
Mhm.
atheists make friends? And meetup.com showed up, and I started going to these
Nice.
skeptic meetings, and we'd go to Cal Poly Pomona and listen to Richard Dawkins and Lawrence Krauss, and I started dating
Oh man,
atheists and
yeah,
hanging out. So I made all new friends. But like in Orange County, California, it's very, very conservative. So you're kind of a little bit newer. Like, I'm a decade out now. So do you mind sharing a little bit about how that, like, losing friends or not
yeah.
knowing how to socialize?
It, I'm still in that.
Yeah.
So yeah, for me, because I'm so new at being open about this, I don't have a lot of that yet.
Yeah.
So thankfully, I do listen to a lot of the main guys that are talking about deconstructing or are talking about atheism or talking about various different ideas and concepts because I started listening to these people when I was actually deconstructing.
Sure.
So, I listened to Forrest Valkai and I listened to Matt Dillahunty. I listened to Line and all those guys and Atheist Experience and all that kind of stuff. And I've jumped through those channels. Recovering from Religion is phenomenal.
Right.
There's a bunch of different assets that are out there.
Yeah.
But actually, in my own life, most of my friends were deep within the religion.
Sure.
I do have one brother who is not a believer, and so he's been a phenomenal help and been awesome as a resource to
Uh-huh.
just rely on through all of this and to
Did
have
he
somebody.
grow up rejecting it, or did he deconvert as an adult?
He was smarter than the rest of us. He rejected it when he was a teenager. So
Now, so that
yeah.
this interests me. So, so some years back, maybe I don't know, maybe 15 years or so ago, my brother married an Indonesian, and in
Mhm.
Indonesia, you cannot marry a Muslim woman unless you're Muslim. Like a
Okay.
woman can't marry outside her faith. I think it's the same if you're a Christian or whatever. It's just the law. A man can. It doesn't work the
A
other way
man can do
around.
whatever he wants, right? Because
Sure.
that's just
So so my brother converted to Islam. And I asked him at the time, I said, didn't that make you feel weird? Like, because in my mind, I'm thinking, wow, demons and, like your allegiance to, and he's like, come on, it's like Spider-Man. It's like believing, because so my brother just rejected it growing up. And I never figured out how he's a few years younger than me, but
yeah,
essentially we had the same experience. How did he just like it just kind of fell off of him like rain off a duck. I'm
yeah.
assuming you're saying your brother was kind of the same way. He just kind of, uh,
Yeah, if you ever listen to Christopher Hitchens talk about how he at a very young age
yeah,
rejected and was like, this stuff doesn't make any sense.
right,
That was my brother as well. He was
yeah,
the one who was like in Sunday school as a young kid going, question, that doesn't make
yeah,
sense. And so the
right.
rest of us are like talking snakes, talking donkeys, dragons, whatever. It's all good.
Well, sure,
Don't know
yeah,
why.
because once you accept it, it can be anything, right? It could
Yeah.
be that like anything is possible. So I
Yeah.
used to argue with people, yeah, the Earth is 4 to 6 thousand years old, and here's why. And I had all the reasons,
Oh yeah.
and the monsters in Job were real dinosaurs or real, monsters.
Yep.
And any argument I had with somebody just reinforced it. Now, what the interesting thing for me, so about 2 decades before I started deconstructing for serious and looking at it, I read some Hugh Ross, who's a cosmologist. I don't know if you're familiar with Hugh Ross, but he's a Christian
Not familiar.
cosmologist that believes the universe is old. And I
Okay.
read his book, and I happened to live in Hawaii at the time. Well, Hawaii is an island chain that the continental drift is still making new islands. Like the Big Island is still
Right.
growing, and Kauai has sorry, I can't say that word. Rivers you can navigate on, and you could like water ski. Well, Oahu and Maui are kind of in between. So you either have to believe that the Earth is millions of years old, or God created Kauai with valleys, and Big Island almost doesn't even have any beaches yet.
Yeah.
Because they didn't have time for sand to show up. So you have to believe God made it that way to trick us, or it's old. So I came to the conclusion, okay,
Yes.
it's old, but I still believed evolution was a big lie, and like scientists were just deceived by Satan and blah blah
Yeah.
blah. I held on to that belief for a really really long time. Um, I eventually had a friend that believed in evolution, and I never brought the subject up with him because I was embarrassed to even talk about it. But I'm like, but in my mind I'm like, how does he believe in evolution? Like that's so, like, we go to a spirit filled church, like, and he prays in tongues and stuff. Like,
Yeah.
how could he believe that's not, but yeah, I guess like you said, it's cognitive dissonance, and you just sort of put off this stuff.
It is. And when you grow up thinking that something like evolution is somehow more fanciful than believing in magical fairy tales,
Right.
you're susceptible to being open to anything, and that's one thing that a lot of people talk about. I know Seth Andrews mentions this quite a bit, but it's proven facts that when you grow up in this type of religion, really any religion, when you grow up in that, believing in these things, you are more susceptible to believing other things that are fanciful things, even when you reject that religion. You often say,
You-
"What
You've
else
dropped
is the
your
lie?"
you've dropped your guard to
Yeah.
those critical. But
Yep.
on the other side, it's really funny how, at least like I remember being a Christian, thinking stuff like astrology. It's like,
Oh
how do
yeah.
people believe that kind of nonsense?
Right.
Like it's really, that's really strange, because you can see things. Well, I mean, even today, it's like, well, Mormonism's obviously false, and Mormons are obviously kind of dumb. Like
Yes.
I remember reading Josh McDowell's book. I was probably in my late teens or early 20s. And I came out of that thinking Jews are really stupid. Like,
Yep.
and I'm a Jew. Jews are stupid. How could Jews not see the obvious truth that Jesus is the Messiah? It's right there in the Bible. It's so obvious. There must be something wrong. Like, I didn't go out saying that, but in my mind, I'm thinking, how could they not? And I thought the same thing about Catholics. Like, how could Catholics believe Jesus didn't have brothers? It says right there in the Bible. And then
Right.
it's not till later when you start realizing that honest thinkers can have differences of opinion on how they interpret things. And at the end of the day, an apologist can explain away anything with something that sounds
Yeah.
super reasonable. And you're
Oh,
like,
sure.
you're like, really?
And to a layperson, that sticks a lot of times, right?
Yeah.
So
Hmm.
for me, I'm right there with you. What really kind of triggered me into realizing that I was deconstructing was this idea. I was teaching a class actually on denominational differences
Okay.
at a church, and in doing so, I was having to go study all of these things, and I'd
Uh,
studied them before, but I was going
yeah.
even deeper. And as I was doing so, I realized there's a lot of things that we reject and we don't believe that other people say they do believe, but we're all saying it's coming from the same person.
Bingo.
And
Yeah.
that was where it was like, wait a minute, how are these two things meshing? And
Yeah.
there's a biblical explanation for it. It's kind of a terrible one, but there's a biblical explanation for it. And but it doesn't go far enough, and that's the issue.
Yeah.
And so it steps into this realm of, if you begin to say anybody and their brother can kind of come up with some thing that a god said, and
Right.
this is what we now have to believe. Well, then where is your measurement for where these things end? There is no
Right.
measurement,
Right.
right? There's always a magic answer.
Yes.
So, and that was a big
But
problem for me.
and the flip side to that is I often wonder why apologists spend so much time and effort trying to find proofs when the answer is you don't need one if there's an all-powerful God, right? So
Yeah.
back in that class I was talking about, the young earth creationist class. So one of the questions I asked is, wait a minute, I have a question. How is it that the starlight got to the earth? Because it's, and he's like, well, God made it mature. Like that's just okay. I mean, it's logically consistent, I guess. I mean, he could have done that, but there's always that kind of answer, right? It's like, well,
Yeah.
God could do that. God could have made the earth 4,000 years ago and look old. God could have raised Jesus from the dead and done this and that and the other thing. And you can go on and on and on and on with these. God could have done it. Well, why spend all this time? So one of the other things he taught in that class was Joshua's long day. So remember, we weren't talking about genocide or any of those problems. We were just talking about how amazing it was that God gave Joshua a longer day so he could continue the war, not thinking about how horrific that is, just how amazing. And this guy had a thing. Well, he had this theory that at one time the orbit of Mars was different and it came close to the Earth, and then the gravity pulled and and that
Oh.
and that kept
Oh.
that kept the Middle East towards the sun. And at the time I accepted that. Well, okay, that's a real clever answer.
Until
Like,
scientifically you realize that
yeah,
would absolutely destroy life on the planet.
well, yeah, it would have destroyed. Yeah, well, I mean, nobody would have survived that except for maybe cockroaches and rats.
Yeah, and
Um,
that's the problem with a lot of these things. It's like you can come up with some fanciful, crazy answer for why this happened, and that's my problem with apologists, right? And I actually am far more accepting of the people who say I believe this on faith and that's it,
yeah,
because if you try to tell me you believe it on evidence, I have a serious issue. And actually, that was a lot of what I wanted to talk about today. I'll show you that in a
sure,
minute, biblically, why I think that this is a flawed idea.
yeah,
Because if you start to try to tell me that, uh, Romans chapter 1, I don't know how familiar you are with this, but Romans chapter 1 essentially talks about how man is without excuse for rejecting God, because all of creation is a testimony to who God
sure,
is, right? So it's the look at the trees argument, but it's actually in the Bible. And so it's like, if you look around at creation,
uh-huh,
you will find God.
yes,
But the problem is that you look at creation and what we see is not something that lines up with the Bible.
yeah,
So for me, that invalidates Romans 1, because it's literally going against what is naturally available. If we're having to put these crazy explanations behind it and to say, well, God made it look old even though it's young, or all of these
right,
kinds of things, that doesn't fit with what Romans 1 says, because Romans 1 says I should be able to look and say, oh yeah, this is totally God. There's no
right,
question.
right.
So
Like, well, exactly. The explanation for, say, Noah's Ark, for instance, is, oh well, God didn't have to have um, every species of cat and dog because microevolution
Oh
later
gosh.
and it's like at the time you accept that.
Yeah.
And I remember one time I was reading about it's like, okay, we have the measurements of the ark in the Bible, and the average animal, if you do this, is smaller than a sheep. And I mean, all like I used to,
Yeah.
so I did my, I think I was a sophomore in high school, and I wrote a report on evolution, why it was wrong. So a lot of the stuff I read was like Dwayne Gish, which I
Yeah.
know dates me, but that was what it was. And Chick Tracks. I mean, like I
Oh
didn't have the
gosh.
internet. I didn't have the internet back then, so it was limited what I had. And when you, especially when you're young and you weren't really, I was not like I was stupid, but I wasn't taught critical thinking.
Yeah.
And you accept, oh, that sounds like a kosher answer, and I don't have to dive in any deeper.
Yeah.
Sure, okay, Noah's Ark's real, and
Yep.
I can trust these people because they're Christians and they're trustworthy and they sound good, that they've done the work,
Right.
right?
They
And
did the math. I'm good.
they did the math, exactly, and
Yeah.
that's the same. And so this is the same problem now that I've, for God only knows why I like this, why I made a channel, why I talk, why I even study the Bible. Like, to me, it's what I do is really bizarre to myself, but I
Yeah.
think I think it has to do with the catharticness of it, and also the hope that I could help somebody get information that I wish I had a long time ago, because then I would have no, if I had stayed in Christianity, I would have nobody to blame but myself.
Right.
But before, when I was a kid, I had other people to blame. I didn't choose to do that,
Yeah.
like I wasn't my choice. I was a kid. So
Exactly.
that's kind of why I feel good about doing this, and why I like studying things and so forth.
Yeah.
So, that is what it is. And it'll be interesting to see. I hope you and I can stay in contact over time, because I'd be really interested to know how I'm sure there's a lot of subjects that you wouldn't be comfortable talking about, and I won't ask you. But I I do. I mean, I've made some videos, and I plan to make some more videos about some of the crazy stuff that I did after, sometime after leaving Christianity,
Yeah.
because I wanted to know. And at the end of the day, it was more like the first time, like I was scared to do acid, like in where I live in Guadalajara, it, like
Yeah.
15 and 16-year-old kids start doing acid. Like, it's totally normal to go to clubs and do acid. But I thought that was like, you're going to have flashbacks and bad trips and your mind's going to
Yeah.
die. And then I listened to Sam Harris. I think he says you should try it once. And some atheist told me you should try it. And then my roommate one day said, here, just try a little bit and go for a walk with me. And I had a really amazing experience. And then later I realized, you fuckers lied to me. You lied to me. Like, it would have been fine if you
Yeah.
had said, acid is amazing, but it's still a sin, just like you say about sex and porn and masturbation and all this other stuff. Like, I get it if you believe that, fine. But why do you gotta lie about it? Like, it's not like, I
Yeah.
mean, some of my most amazing experiences in life, and if I'll quit talking about it. If I keep talking about it, the serotonin in my, if I talk about my first times with mushrooms, the serotonin in my brain will start triggering it, and I will start feeling that euphoria again, which is really
Wow.
amazing, because you don't have to do drugs that often. Once you do them a few times, you just tell somebody about it and you're high again. But when I realized that paralleled being in church with my hands raised, worshiping in the Holy Spirit, I realized, wow, this is brain
Yeah.
chemistry. So of course people believe it, because it's so the euphoria is so amazing, and it's so real. Like, when you're
Yeah.
worshiping with good worship music, the Holy Spirit is real to you. There's no
Oh yeah.
denying it. And it wasn't later until I did acid and realized, whoa, wait a minute, that's real too.
Yeah.
So, anyways, before
There's
we get,
ways to fabricate these things. There really is, and that bothered me because I was
yes,
a tongue speaking Pentecostal, Bible thumping,
yeah,
yeah, it was bad. So yeah, for me to go, oh man, I lied to myself. I didn't even know I
yes,
was doing it. Like
right.
that was scary. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, you tell yourself what you need to hear.
right.
Um,
You do.
um, so it was interesting to me. So when I went through my deconstruction, my youngest, um, I want to say she was like 10 or 11 years old, and I was divorced. So she didn't live with me. She lived with her mom. But people later accused me of influencing her to atheism. And that was like the last thing, like I never would try to
Yeah.
tell a 10-year-old what to what to think. And she's very smart. Like she's now graduated college and she's going on to either master's or a PhD program. Yada yada. She's brilliant. So I asked her one time. I said, "What was it like for you?" And she said that she would pray to God, like, "God, are you there?" And then she would say, "God, God, I'm so sorry for doubting." And she told me this whole story of her going through this process of apologizing to God and being afraid because, and then eventually she realized to her own satisfaction that there wasn't nobody there. Like, but she came up with that on her own. Now, I know
Yeah.
people, my old church friends where they knew her as a baby, none of them really believe that story. And whatever, they can believe what they want. I
Yeah.
I would never do that to her. Like, I'll argue with my kids about religion or politics, but I'll never like tell them what to do or what to think.
Yeah.
My oldest is still a theist. Like, I think he has a weird, like, because he was way much older. He when I deconstructed, he was already off and married and had kids. So for him it was like he had quit going to church. So I'd ask him, like, well, you don't go to church and you don't, like, is there anything about Christianity that you really believe's true? And he's like, well, not really, but he still believes
Yeah.
in God. And I go, okay, fair enough. I mean, you essentially live your life like a like a deist. Like, you believe there's a God, but he's not talking to you. Okay, I can't really argue with that. And then my middle child was actually, she got really rebellious. She went off and rebelled, and I used to, try to invite her back to church and pray for her and stuff. And she went to Europe for an exchange program, and she came back from Europe and said, everyone in Switzerland's an atheist and I'm an atheist now. Like, okay, fair enough. So
Yeah.
it's interesting how that generation had a different experience from my generation, because we didn't have the internet. We didn't have, my upbringing was a lot more insular. And you know,
Right.
you're younger than me, so you probably had more access to information, but I'm imagining your childhood was very kind of similar. And
Yeah.
if you don't trust your parents, who are you gonna trust, right? Like, it's
Right.
like every time your mom makes you pancakes, you're not gonna ask for a test to make sure there's no poison in it. You just trust your
Right.
mom's not gonna hurt you. So when she
Yeah.
tells you Jesus is real, mommy's not gonna hurt me. Jesus is
Yeah.
real, you know.
Yeah.
So
And they're believing it because they trust the people that are telling them, and
yeah,
that's the problem. The entirety of the Christian faith is built on not even eyewitness testimony. It's built on hearsay testimony. It's
yeah,
built on the testimonies of people saying God is real, who didn't actually even experience the things that
right.
they are claiming these other people experienced. And yeah, it's when you begin to realize that, you begin to go, oh man, this is a lot shakier than I thought it was.
Yeah, it's yeah, you're on very shaky
Yeah.
ground.
Yeah.
So let's get to some of the stuff
Sure.
that we wanted to talk about in terms of, maybe before you start that, can we kind of delineate like what we're talking about? So
Yeah.
there's there's lies, like, where, a Ponzi scheme con artist sociopath knows he's lying, like, um he's actually conning you and he knows it. Like, there's that level, right?
Right. Right.
And then there's a level below that where the person is doing the same thing, but they're actually honest. Like, maybe they honestly believe the investment's good. They're asking for
Yep.
money, and they really do. They're not a Ponzi scheme that, even though they end up taking your money, they believed it, but they're lying.
Yeah.
But not intentionally.
They may be wrong, but they're
Right.
not intentionally wrong.
Right.
Yes.
They're not intentionally wrong. And
Yes.
and often those are the very nice people that we trust, whether
Yeah.
it's religion or politics or whatever, or, like, join me in this, join me in this investment or something. And
Right.
then
Right.
and then at the bottom you sort of have people that are just parroting what they've heard. They're kind of well intentioned, but at the same time they're probably sort of just talking to hear themselves, to so that in their own mind they can kind of retell themselves, right? So
Yeah.
I think when somebody is parroting William Lane Craig or Frank Turek and they're a believer, they haven't studied the source material. They don't
Right.
know Greek, they don't know Hebrew, and I don't know those things either. But at least in my case, I like try to read both sides, and I think a
Right.
lot of times that person, they trust William Lane Craig, they parrot what he says, or lately it's Gary Habermas, right? Because he's just come out with his new book. So they'll parrot those things, and they don't know it's misleading. They don't
Yeah.
know that there's lies in enmeshed in what they're saying.
Right.
So is there another category you think, or does that kind of like cover it?
So it's not terrible to say that those are the pretty good categories. I think there's one more, and it's a nuanced one. It's very similar to the ones that we're just talking about right there, but
Hmm.
it's this. It goes even further to where you're lying to yourself without realizing that you're lying to yourself. So let me give you a great example.
Okay.
If I tell you, Michael, your shirt is yellow, I'm telling a lie. Your shirt is
Hmm.
red. It's very
Right.
clearly red, right? But here's the thing. If I have a belief system where I believe that the color red is actually the color yellow, it always has been. And what we see as red has always been yellow. And
Yeah.
when you see red, it is yellow.
Right.
And I've convinced myself of that belief system to where I can no longer separate those thoughts. And I've been fully indoctrinated this concept where I am fully committed. I cannot be convinced otherwise.
Yeah.
That I'm not even actually lying to myself at this point. I'm fully convinced of my own version of the truth.
Right.
And that's where I think a lot of these guys who are seemingly lying are. They don't even see it as lying to themselves anymore. They're just so fully convinced of their truth being absolute. And that's the issue. Is
Yeah.
that they think that their absolute truth is something that they can actually stand on, which absolute truth is kind of a joke.
Yeah. So my mom used to say, "I know that I know, and I know
Yes.
that I know that I know." So
Yes.
any sub peripheral issue may be debatable,
Yep.
but I know that God is real, and and he comes to us as the Holy Spirit or in Jesus. Like, I know that this is true, and I think you're right there that becomes ingrained in the person where they can't get away from that. And I
Yeah.
think when you have offshoots of whether it's Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons, or Oneness Pentecostals, like groups that actually they'll look at stuff and they'll deny the Trinity, and then mainline Christianity says, how could you not accept the Trinity? And those of us on
Right.
the outside are going, you guys are all arguing about stuff that there can never be a right answer to it, right?
No.
Because it's
Yeah.
impossible. It's
And something that
impossible.
was established as a much later doctrine, by the way. That wasn't something that the original first century Christians didn't believe in the Trinity.
Right.
And
Right.
some of these people try to trace it back to that and like, oh no, they did. They totally did. No, they didn't. This
Yeah.
concept didn't show up until much later.
Well, because if
So
you firmly believe something like that, then it makes sense to think that even first century Jews believed in the Trinity, because of
right,
course they would.
right,
It's right there in the Bible.
sure, why not? It was right
Yeah,
there.
but
Didn't
I
they have the
was I
Bible?
was wondering the other day when you go through like let's pretend we're the gospel writers, right? We're Mark
Right.
or Luke or Matthew, and we're writing. We're going back to we're using the Septuagint, right? And we're going back and we're looking for proof text, and we find a psalm, or we find something that like the first sentence matches what we want it to say. Like, okay,
Yep.
Jesus did this. Oh, this is a great prophecy. And then the next sentence says something like, got married and had 15 kids. Well, Jesus didn't get married and have 15 kids. Well, that part of it didn't apply. Like
Yes.
who like how do you decide which half of the verse to include and which half to throw out? Well,
Oh man,
you're just
it's
you're
so bad.
yeah, you're
Yeah.
just cherry picking out what you want.
So from a pastoral perspective, they teach you that prophecy has a duality to it. Okay,
Mhm.
and that prophecy is always for now and for later. And so what they do, and this is literally how they use this to try to say that these prophecies are okay. They
Yeah,
cherry pick the parts that they say are for Jesus and
right.
say these ones were for later. And those other ones that are in the middle of this that totally break the context and mean nothing, like what we want it to, those were for then.
That was
So,
that
you
was
know,
that was for pre-Jesus time, like say
right.
a city being destroyed or something like that.
Exactly,
Uh,
exactly. Which ironically enough, when you look at that, you can disprove those because half of those don't come true either. So,
well, yeah, no,
yeah.
that was an interesting thing I was learning about the
Yeah.
the book of Daniel, where
Oh
it's
yeah.
like all the prophecies come true because that's up to where he was writing, and then everything
Right.
that was in the future, like he starts making mistakes.
Yeah, he's
Um,
got really good accuracy up until the 2nd century BCE, and then past
and
that,
And so when I think back, like I wish we could play this video game where I could go back in time and be exposed to some of this stuff at say 19 or 20 when
yeah,
I was reading Josh McDowell and I was just accepting it. Because when you go through Josh McDowell, it's like, okay, this prophecy said this is going to happen to this city. This prophecy says the Messiah is going to, you know,
yeah,
the prophecy says the Messiah will be born of a virgin. And what's the chance of that? Well, only one human out of 100 100 billion got born to a virgin. So that means we got to plug into our formula. Like he was actually doing a Bayesian analysis, but he wasn't calling that, I don't think. But he was
yeah,
just saying, okay, on this line, being born to a virgin is 1 in 100 billion. Okay, being born in Bethlehem, that's
yeah.
1 in 120 million. Uh, blah blah blah. And then at the end of the day, you have, oh well, the chance of Jesus not being the Messiah is one with
Yeah.
a million zeros after it, and so obviously he is. And as a young
That's
person,
horrible.
I accepted that. Well, now I see how ridiculous that
Yes.
is, and how unfair it is.
Yeah.
And
For,
um,
for for any listeners that don't understand why that's so bad, because I think this is the problem. Because I did the same thing, Michael. I fell into
mhm,
these traps of like the probability. Look at it; it's crazy. You can
yeah,
never decide this. If you were to go through all of your activities that you did today and list out the probability that they all happened in the way that they happened, your day would be impossible.
right, right,
That's literally how that works.
yeah,
You can't use probability in that way. It doesn't function like that because what
yeah,
happened actually already happened. So the odds of it happening is actually 100% because
right,
it happened.
right.
So it doesn't work that way.
Well, and it's the same. I see the same thing happen with counters of evolution or origin of life or any of the fine
Yep.
tuning of the universe. And back when I was a believer, like those things made perfect sense to me. Like, well, yeah, of course, the eyeball, it's impossible for this to evolve, impossible. And here's the math.
Right.
So one of the challenges I have, and maybe at some point somebody can put something in the comments even down the road, or maybe somebody will tell me what's a good way. Like I'm trying to find a good way to like help explain, like not try to tell people, like I don't want to ever be like, "Oh, you should believe me," because that's what happened to you before.
Yeah. Don't
You
do that.
shouldn't you shouldn't believe me.
No,
But
don't
I
take
want
my
to
word.
give people good
Yeah.
like analogies or good resources in order to think for themselves without being authoritarian or out telling them, like I could be completely full of crap and be totally deceived, like we all could. Like one of my
Right.
running jokes is I kind of hope God's real, but it's some really niche thing so that most of us are in hell and I can laugh at the
Uh,
Calvinists. Like,
yeah.
dude,
Yeah.
you guys got it wrong too. Have a beer, because the only
Yep.
people in heaven are the Jehovah's Witnesses, or are some bizarre cult that nobody even knew about.
Right. Which is always hysterical because you talk to people and you tell them you're an atheist. That one of the first things they always say is, aren't you afraid of hell? And it's like, aren't you afraid of the Muslim hell? Or
Yeah.
I mean, like, come on, like that's
Or yeah,
dumb.
or the Calvinist hell.
Yeah. How many hells exist that you're not going to in your mind?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah,
come
no,
on.
there's
Oh,
yeah, it's just so much. Okay, so let's double back over to
yes,
the lies and the reasons. I think you were gonna
yes,
give some insight into like what's going on in somebody's head, or what are they thinking. Like even with William, like Craig, I don't think he's writing himself notes. Okay, this is where I need to lie in my talk. I don't think he's
right.
doing that. But it's hard for me to accept that he doesn't know that he's being deceptive. So, and I think I hear
Right.
you saying he's justifying it, not that he's ignorant. Is that fair?
Yeah, so in his own mind, I don't think he sees himself as ignorant. I think it goes back to what I mentioned, is that he believes that he has absolute truth. And so even though there is cognitive dissonance, so they literally can say one thing in one sentence and the next thing in the next sentence, and the rest of us are going, those don't work.
Yeah.
And in their mind, they're going, I can justify them both because I have absolute truth, which is just crazy circular logic. But because
Right.
they've already made up their mind, they're not lying in their own head. They really truly believe they're delivering truth.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, I
Yeah,
think
it's
they're honest.
bad.
So the one that I guess it triggered me the most was a recent interview with William Lane Craig and um,
There's a couple of them.
who's the Jewish. I want to say Ben Stiller, but it's not Ben Stiller. It's
Rabbi
Shapiro,
Coburn.
Ben Shapiro.
Oh, Ben Shapiro.
So he says in this talk, well, slavery back then wasn't that way,
Chattel
right?
slavery.
And then he says,
Yeah.
and then he says, and besides all that, everyone was released after 7 years. And I'm saying, okay, there is a subsection of slavery that was like it's not. This isn't a total lie. He's telling the truth. There's a subsection of, and you want to call it
Right.
servant or indentured, are fine. That the Bible, the the law says after 7 years you let him go. Okay, fine. But then he completely ignored the rest of the verses that describe the rules for chattel slavery. So my question to you, and maybe you have some insight into this, is when he's studying that, it's impossible that he didn't read the verse like just right here, right? Like
Right.
he read the whole chapter. So he has to know, like he's got to know, right? So is it just, do you think in his mind he's like, well, I can't really tell people chattel slavery was legit and the slavery in the American South was legally very similar to the way the Hebrews were allowed to own slaves. I mean,
Yeah.
the laws were very similar. And is he thinking, I can't tell people that because it'll cause a greater harm because it'll hurt people's faith. So God would want me to like this knowledge is for people that go to seminary. They're mature enough to take it. And
Yeah.
even that's dangerous because you end up with guys like Bart Ehrman, right? Like so
Yeah.
you
Bart will have
definitely
fun with that one.
you don't want the peons hearing this.
So I don't think it's that. I really don't. And actually, and this is bad. It's more nefarious than that.
Okay.
Because it's not that they're trying, in my mind, mind you, I'm speaking for my belief of what they are thinking, and I can't know what they're thinking. So we'll just preface it with that. I don't know
Sure.
what William Lane Craig has going on in his head. Maybe he's got us all fooled and he's an atheist. Who knows?
That would be funny.
It'd be funny.
Yeah.
But the reality is that I think it's more nefarious, and it comes back to this idea of believing the absolute truth. And when you do that, what you have to do, and we'll jump into the biblical aspect here in a minute, because there's a couple passages I want to point out for why this works.
Okay.
But you have to accept the Bible as absolute truth. And the Bible says that God is good and everything that God does is good.
Right.
Therefore, anytime God does something in the Bible that's evil in our minds, from what a normal, rational, moral person would say, the Christian who's already ascribed to the fact that this is truth and God is good has to look at that and say, it's good.
Right.
And so if you are a true Bible-believing Christian, slavery in the Bible is good.
Right.
The genocide in the Bible is
He
good.
said that.
Yes.
William Lane Craig actually said in that interview
Yes.
with Shapiro, I wish we had that back again because it would give people more self-respect.
Scary.
Well,
Scary.
I mean, does I can't imagine what I would have thought if I had heard that as a believer because I wasn't listening to him as a believer.
Right.
But I would like to think that I would be mad when I would like to think I would hope that if I could have gone back and been that believer, I would say, wait a minute, that's complete bullshit and that's really ugly. And it's I mean it's definitely it's a weird form of bigotry and racism, like all mixed together. To say that he would be happy if we had slavery again. Like I know they always say, "Oh, it wasn't race based." I know they say that, and in their time, yeah, it wasn't true because they were all Canaanites. Yeah, well, fine, it wasn't race based, but that's not how it
Shockingly,
played
though,
out
so
over
were they.
Yeah,
So were
exactly.
the Israelites.
Right.
Hint.
So,
Genetically
but
the
it
same.
played out. It played out over the course of the next 2,000 years as having a race attached to it.
Right.
So like I want to be historically accurate, and I don't want to go far to what people might say is the political left and be insulted by everything. Like I don't want to be that person, but at the same time, I do want to be sensitive. It's like, wait a minute, if you're saying you want slavery to come back for people that are in debt, well, like what are you really saying?
That's horrible.
Yes.
We have to, and that's the problem with a lot of these things. When you decide that the Bible is absolute truth and you decide that everything that God does is good, and there's a lot of, I mean, you could just name your person you want to pick that does this. I mean, Hitchens did this, a whole bunch of other people. Then you can get good people to do evil things
Yeah.
in the name of God simply by saying, this is good.
Sure,
God
sure.
says it, it's
Well,
good.
it's divine command theory. It's if God does it, it's fine.
Yep,
Which always
exactly.
brings me back to like, how can you say you have an objective moral standard when when anything is permissible if God is
Right.
telling you to do it? Like you have no, it's completely subjective. It's just if God tells you to rape,
Yep.
pillage, burn down a city,
Yeah.
hey, it's completely legit. Okay, so
And rape and pillage and burn down cities is interesting because if you go to the Ten Commandments, and people get this wrong all the time, one of the Ten Commandments is thou shalt not kill, right? We call it
mhm,
murder. We
yeah,
say thou shalt not murder, but it actually is thou shalt not kill. And killing is very different than murder. Murder is a legal term.
yeah,
Killing is just killing. And yet then God immediately orders them to do something that is in opposition to what one of the commandments is, to go kill.
yeah.
And what would also be the definition of murder, by the way.
Well, I mean, when you're killing non-combatants, which William Lane Craig had to go back. So there's a whole nother talk where
Oh heavens,
he had to go explain himself, and listening to that is hurtful. Like your
yeah,
ears want to bleed because he's
it's
like
rough.
saying, I mean, he says ridiculous stuff like, well, all they had to do was just leave. They
I
just had
heard
to
that
leave.
one.
They just had to leave their
Oh,
homeland, and they would have got killed. So it was really their fault.
I
Uh,
heard I heard him giving that, and I
oh,
that was appalling. It
it's
was appalling.
terrible. It's
Yeah.
really yeah, I mean, it's really
But
bizarre.
but here's the thing: from a biblical perspective, they believe that because again, you've had to accept it as truth, and if you accept it as truth, then God warned the Canaanites 400 years before He came in to attack them that
Right.
they had to get the heck out, or really they had to shape up and quit doing the things they were doing, and God would accept them, or they had to get out of the land.
Yeah.
So when He goes in, that's the justification in the minds of the believers that no, God's just cleaning house because He already warned these people. I mean, killing babies
Well,
is
and I
okay
would
if I
ask
warned you.
I would ask how did he warn them? Did he send a, like, is it written in stone? Can we still go read that somewhere?
Right,
I mean,
exactly.
yeah, come on. I think these are just justifications after the fact.
There,
Okay,
yeah,
so
it's all ad hoc.
let's go back to the types of lies. So
Yep.
you're saying that someone like a William Lane Craig is, since he believes the Bible's true and he believes God is good, in his mind, so I'm still a little confused on this. In his
Yep.
mind, is he not lying, or in
Yes.
his mind is he kind of fudging the truth, but it's for a good cause?
No, in his mind, he's not lying. So let me
He's
let me give you a couple. We'll jump through a couple verses here because I think that they make sense biblically why somebody would believe this.
okay.
So Romans 14:23 says that everything that does not come from faith is sin. Okay. And now this is going through a whole passage in which, if you really get into it, it's kind of crazy because what Paul is talking about is that, essentially what you believe about things can actually be sin, right? So if you
Mhm.
believe it's sin, it can be sin, which is,
Oh,
that
yeah,
gets into something a little later. That's
I
wild.
totally remember those
Yeah.
teachings. I
It's a
totally
whole
remember.
issue
Yeah,
because if that's true, that we're getting in a weird place.
yeah.
But what he does say is he says that everything that does not come from faith is sin. So if we think of that, then go to Hebrews 11:1. Well, what is faith, right? Now, faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see. Literally, faith is belief without evidence.
Right.
That's what faith is. Now, you might also have evidence, but you're supposed to have that faith first. So from the very start, you have to suspend your intellect and logic. You must approach the Bible with faith, believe it to be true before you can even read it and find out if it's true. You have to already have this belief. Now, if you're still saying, well, maybe, Chris, maybe you're wrong entirely on this, and maybe that's off base, let me show you how it confirms itself.
Okay.
Paul goes further, and in 1 Corinthians, in verse 14 of chapter 2, he says that there's no understanding of the things that come from God without the Spirit of God. All right? It says literally that the man without the Spirit does not accept the things that come from the Spirit of God, for they are foolishness to him, and he cannot understand them because they are spiritually discerned. That means that you literally cannot approach the Bible without faith, without already having belief, without already having the Spirit of God, or you will not understand the words. So this is a position where you have to decide absolute truth before evaluating the evidences of the claims that are within this book.
Right. And I've heard this argument in many different forms of, well, you can't, because you're an atheist and you don't have God and you don't have this faith, you can't accurately know what you're talking about or accurately use scripture.
Yep.
So your whole argument is wrong. Just to, even if you're saying the right thing, you're still wrong. Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
I
I
had
have,
that same thing happen with a friend of mine who literally told me that when he and I were having a conversation, is that I can't use scripture, and I'm like, I, dude, I was a pastor for over a decade. Do you really think I don't know what this thing says? Like,
yeah.
but
Or that you were,
now
or
I
that you were
can't.
faking it the whole time and you never
Right,
had, like, so if Christianity is true, you and I are going to probably still go to heaven even if we don't want to, because God promised Jesus that he wouldn't lose one sheep.
right.
And
Yeah, I really hope not. I really hope
well,
not.
I hope not too. That's one of my fears when people talk about hell. I'm like, yeah, actually I do have a fear about hell that I'm not going to get to go because I once saved always
Yeah,
saved is true.
I
So in that
listen.
case, I hope the Calvinists are right.
I was an annihilationist before I finally deconverted, at least because I believed that the Bible's pretty clear that the lake of fire is the second death, and death is
Okay.
death, not eternal life. And even Jesus says, "I came to give you eternal life." He doesn't say he does not say that if you don't believe me, you'll still have eternal life, and if you
Yeah.
believe in eternal torment in hell, that's eternal life. So that doesn't make any sense. So
Yeah.
that's not a biblical concept in any way, shape, or form. So let me stop existing, please, versus the perpetual version of heavenly North Korea that is heaven.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want that.
No, and I agree. So I have a little bit of a small. So there's a relatively new YouTuber, Brandon, who has a channel Mind Shift. Maybe it's about a year old, and he's one of the guys I follow a lot. I like his take on things, and he did like a 2 hour thing with the Council of Trent, the Catholic
Oh yeah,
YouTuber, about this issue. And Brandon's position is no, I want annihilation. I don't want to live forever. But and my counter to that is, now you guys are not thinking. I think you guys are not. I think your human limited thinking is too limited to actually know what you want. Like, let me live a billion years and then maybe decide. Because I seem to think, this is my position. I think if we live in a virtual construct, or if brain emulations become possible, that at the end of the day, there might be some way to have endless entertainment. And at heart, I'm a hedonist. So as long as I feel good, just give me more entertainment and I'll be like, I can watch
yeah,
Breaking Bad or Gladiator at least once every couple years for the rest of my life. I don't think I'll ever get bored. Now, could I watch it for a billion years? Well, no, but can't somebody come up with something new? Like, it
yeah,
seems like there's an infinite number of stuff. And one of the science fiction guys I read is a guy named Greg Egan, and he's got a book called Permutation City, in which somebody develops this expanding universe in a construct, and one of the characters will spend 10,000 years just climbing a cliff or building wooden things, and then the computer system will put him into a new environment where he'll have he'll make clay pottery for 1,000 years, and as long as he's happy, he stays doing that. Now,
yeah,
it seems bizarre, but at the end of the day, it's like the stuff where time, like, if, we're watching a good movie, or we're at a party with friends, or whatever it may be. When we're doing things like that, time essentially, like, doesn't exist,
right.
or it goes by too fast. But at the end of the day, it's like, okay, yeah, you're going to get bored with anything if you just do it over and over again. But the number of unlimited things in my mind seems like infinity, right? I mean, I
It
think there's,
seems like it to an
so I don't know.
extent, but I don't know.
It all remains to be seen. So
It does. It does.
is
There's
there another category of type of lie or miss? Like, when I listen to a guy like, say, J. Warner Wallace, right?
mhm.
So
Okay.
I think to myself now, like, so he got called out. There's a channel, Prophet Azad, that called him out a few things. He actually responded. He didn't name the channel, but we all knew when we watched it what he was talking about. And and he had an excuse like, "Oh, I don't actually kind of remember exactly when I was changed to become an atheist and when I was a Christian," because his story is bullshit. It's the same as what's his face, the man, sorry, my brain faded on the name. Lee Strobel. So
Oh
Lee
yeah.
Strobel's story is an obvious lie. Like when I first read his book, I actually read his book as an atheist. Like I hadn't read it before. Like
Oh really?
I never felt the need to read his book when I was a
Yeah.
Christian. That I picked it up as an atheist because I was interested. And the first thing I noticed is my wife became a Christian and I converted. And then some years later, I went and talked to JP Moreland. Now, this struck me because I went to church with JP Moreland. So I went to the same, I mean, I listened to JP Moreland speak a few times and we sat in the same church and we had similar friends. My mom was a pastor on staff. She knew him. I had friends where he went to home group with. So like I wasn't friends with JP, but he traveled in the same circles as me. So that was very interesting to me. And when I saw that Lee Strobel admits that he became a Christian with his wife and years later, like I figured this out in the very beginning of like, starting to think critically. It wasn't like 10 years later when I
Yeah.
was like reading a lot. I figured that on my own. Like, wait a minute, this is bullshit. You're telling me that you became a Christian and you believed, and then you went and talked to just Christians, and one of them is JP Moreland. No, come on. It's insanity. So
Right.
so so Jay Warner Wallace and Lee Strobel, I kind of put them in the same camp. It's like they seem like grifters to me. Like they're so like going back to the question to you is, are these guys aware? Do you think they're aware of how much bullshit they sound like to
Mm.
someone on the outside and they just ignore that? So like for instance, honest like so what's his name? Sean McDowell is pretty
Yep.
honest and he doesn't block comments and he's actually responded to some of my comments. So I can comment on Sean McDowell's page and Sean McDowell's cool with it.
Yep.
I responded a couple times on Jay Warner Wallace, it blocked immediately. So to me, it's
Yeah.
like, okay, I have a respect for, and Mike Winger's the same. Actually, I accused Mike Winger of deleting a comment, and he came down. He responded to me. He goes, "I don't delete comments." And then later, he made a comment in the comment section and said, "Hey, I think other people were accusing him this of, and I've been accused of this." And it turns out there's some touchy algos on YouTube, and so I apologize
Always.
to Mike Winger. I'm like, "Hey, I'm sorry. I believe you, like because I've been accused of the same thing." So I have a respect for people that are willing to dialogue honestly. I mean, fine, block trolls or somebody trying to put
Right.
their WhatsApp
Right.
number in to sell somebody like a con artist. Yeah, okay, fine.
Right.
But a legitimate question, somebody's not like calling names or being a racist or something. Fine, let the comment stand, especially if it's a hard, good question. That should be
Sure.
what you want the most. So. So when Jay Warner Wallace not only wouldn't answer my question, but blocked me and like just cut off dialogue, and then I watch these things where he's called out on the story that he's giving as being a lie and it's obvious, then I think, okay, these guys are con artists.
Yeah.
Do you feel somewhat the same? Like, do you mentally put these people in different boxes?
So I think that there's to an extent. So I've actually met Sean, and so I had the privilege of having a conversation with him and Elisa Childers as well. I've met her. So it and I've heard him speak on deconstructing and faith and doubt and various
Hmm.
different components as well. And obviously consumed a lot of their information as well. Yes, there is a slight different compartmentalization to somebody who's going to be, a very honest interlocutor and kind of come to things and say, let's have valid conversations. I think Sean does a really good job of allowing valid conversations, which is almost more shocking than when he says things that you're like, whoa, that was way off.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so, but yes, there are some out there who do seem like they're being more dishonest. But here's the category that I lump a lot of these people into, and it was something that there's a book called Kingdom of the Cults, and
uh,
it's written by Walter Martin. It's a
yeah.
gigantically thick book.
I heard him speak before he died in like the
Yeah.
night in the I want to say that I heard him speak in the late '80s, maybe.
Okay.
And I was a fan of CRI and Hank. I was a fan of
Yeah.
Hank Hanegraaff until I joined the Vineyard, and then I hated Hank Hanegraaff. It wasn't until years later I realized Hank Hanegraaff was right. But I was a big fan of the Kingdom of the Cults. I used to invite Mormons in my
Yes.
house, and I would have the Kingdom of the Cults and a concordance and a Bible. and they'd be like, "Why did you invite us here?" And I'm like, "Well, because we're going to talk about this."
We're gonna get into it.
Yeah, I don't know if there was any fruit of that ever, but
No.
but I enjoy. So I know who you're talking about.
Yes. So what's fascinating though is that if you actually go back, and I don't know how long it's been since you've read the book, but if you go back and you read, you don't have to go too far, but the first couple of chapters in, you'll get all you kind of really need to kind of understand this. But Martin is actually making this argument about cults, while just about everything he's saying applies to most mainline Christian denominations as well. And so you can begin to see and not everything, mind you, because I'm not going to sit here and say that every religion is a cult. I don't necessarily think that, but I think a lot of them share some similar traits.
Sure.
But there's 3 traits that he brings up that I think are highly shared amongst most believers who have dogmatic belief in their faith. So if you look at somebody who you're saying, this guy seems like he's grifting, you look at Lee Strobel or somebody like that, and you're saying, this guy seems like he's really being dishonest. I think they're falling victim to one of to these 3 concepts. So we can jump into them if you want.
Yeah, please. Yeah, go right ahead.
So the first one is closed-mindedness. So it's not being interested in exploring facts. All right. And of course,
you already know the answer.
You already know it. Yeah. And we already read the scripture, right? I mean, we already read that. So they don't care. So they're already approaching whatever the conversation is. We're not looking for new information, not looking for facts, not looking for truth, because they already have truth.
Right.
So that's kind of the first thing. The second one is this idea of institutional dogmaticism. So this is usually driven with supernatural authority or divine revelation. And this is where I think things get really interesting, because when you think about divine revelation, the New Testament authors had divine revelation. What gives them the right to add to the scripture more so than the Mormons? And so Joseph Smith, who has claiming divine revelation,
right?
Or any of the popes who claimed divine revelation, or any of these pastors who claim that God said to go buy this piece of land. Yeah. What is giving these people any more justification for this divine revelation? But that institutional dogmaticism, that they have the ability to have this supernatural authority to give direction, is literally a part of what Martin is talking about. Is a cult trait.
Yeah.
And so you're indoctrinated within that. And the last thing is that cognitive dissonance, which is really that thought in isolation, where you're taking 2 compartments of ideas, and on one compartment, this idea, and then on the other compartment, this idea, and in your head, they're not crossing, but they are diametrically opposed. So they are not correct thoughts when you put them together, but for some reason in your own head, you're capable of holding both opinions and both values.
Yeah. You think that's a form of dissociation?
I don't know if I would say that. It might be. It might be, because when you're a believer, you're taught that you have a soul, but you're also taught that you have this fleshly presence, and you almost have these 2 warring factions within your body. And so you're constantly told that when you do things that are wrong, that's your flesh speaking out. And when you focus on things that are right, that's your soul that's speaking out, which is just Gnosticism stuff back, way back in the day that the church throws out. But they like to teach it still in their same ideas. So that might be a dissociation idea, that you're almost developing 2 identities for yourself. And you're disassociating one from the other. So you can then take all of these things of the flesh and say, these fit in this category, and all the things of the spirit fit in this category, and they can't meet necessarily. So if truth is found here and truth is found here, both can be accepted at the same time, even if they contradict.
Yeah, this is reminding me. So my ex from this goes back to my vineyard days. I got married, and we did some premarital counseling as we're going to get, planned a wedding date, so forth. And the pastor was like, well, of course you're not having sex, and if you are, you need to stop. And I'm like, yeah, okay, fine. But when I look back on that, I think it's really strange, because both of us were strong believers, and she was especially kind of legalistic, and she was a Sunday school teacher. Every Sunday she was teaching little kids. And we never even discussed the fact that we were having sex before we were married, because it was just normal. So I'm trying to think of how I of how I compartmentalized that. I just don't think I ever thought, like, I just thought, like, I don't know, I guess I thought I was an exception to the rule, or God understood I really loved her, so it was kind of like she was already my wife, even though we haven't had the ceremony. And you know,
Yeah.
so but and when so going back to what you're talking about, I think that as Christians, we did those, like, anytime, whether it was looking at porn or drinking too much, or whatever sin your particular culture may have had, whether it was gambling or getting a tattoo, like, you just compartmentalize that as, like, that's not, and then you just don't question it. Like, you
Yeah.
never sit there in front of the mirror and say, okay, why am I doing this? Because this is really goes against all my values, and this would be really, like, I want to please God, and I'm really, like, you might feel that guilt later, and then you go to church, and the
Oh yeah.
and the pastor will say, okay, uh who, who in here has looked at porn in the last month? And you're like, I'm sorry. And then everybody prays, and you're like, oh, okay, I'm please forgive me, God, I'm sorry.
And then you
But
go back out and do it again.
well, right, because you're
Because that's what you do.
well, later you're not thinking about, and it
Yeah.
could be with anything. Like, the open to me, the open sin is overeating. So, like, it's very
That's a
common
huge one.
to use food as part of celebration and togetherness, which is all healthy and good.
Yeah.
But then when you're around a whole bunch of people that are all overeating, and you're all suffering from various conditions of being obese, so like diabetes or whatever, like, nobody ever stops and says, hey, all of us overeating is the
Yeah.
same as gay sex, or looking at porn, or stealing from a little old lady, like, or shoplifting. Like, for me, never in my life would I shoplift. To me, that, like, stealing is like the lowest of the low. Now, I don't know why I developed that, but whether as an atheist or a Christian, like, even stealing a penny, to me, I just couldn't do it. Like, I
Yeah.
still, like, that's a very strong thing. Now, there's things as an atheist, I'm like, okay, I don't care about that anymore.
Right.
Like doing drugs or something, or those kind of things. But what instilled that, I have no idea. Like, where did that come from, and how do we determine these things? So but this reminds me of line, which was kind of our subject here. Lying is also one of those things, like, don't
Yep.
ever lie, especially with your loved ones, like in your marriage or with your kid. Like, I always told that to my kids, like, all, like, we'll work out any problems, but don't lie. Like,
Yeah.
lying is
Just
really,
tell
really,
the truth.
yeah. I mean, it's like,
Yeah.
it's you're you're insulting and degrading the other person, you're dehumanizing them, and you're showing them that you're not trustworthy. And and telling a lie is like walking down Main Street naked. That's how you should
Yeah.
feel, like, that ashamed and that dirty. Like, don't lie. Now, more pragmatically, now, as an atheist, I think sometimes lies are appropriate, and sometimes,
Yep.
like, it's subjective.
And
Um,
sometimes lies are actually beneficial.
yeah, then
You
sometimes
know,
they're good.
I
Yeah,
mean,
sometimes.
yeah, sometimes if you were to, and again, thought experiments are thought experiments, they don't always work, but if you were to pose a situation in which you telling a lie, let's say, frees somebody from domestic abuse,
Yeah,
that would be beneficial and that would be morally right.
I agree.
But
Agreed,
biblically it wouldn't
100%.
be.
Agreed, 100%.
Yeah.
Now, so tying back to our subject at hand of apologists, do you think they ever go through that, or it's just completely over their head?
So it again. That's, I think that's where you're compartmentalizing,
Yeah,
because there's a unique way to be able to look at something that you're doing in life, go about it, but not assign the value to it that the Bible necessarily would in that moment, and just miss it entirely.
yeah,
Or to look at something in the Bible, pass it over, and not take it as truth. I'll give you an example. Deuteronomy chapter 13 actually lays out how, if somebody, and it gives you this long list of people, it's just the Bible's way of being like, and your brother, and this person, and this person. It's just the Bible's way of saying, if someone.
hmm
And so if someone comes to you and tries to lead you astray to another religion, tries to bring you to worship other gods, you're to take that person into the town square and stone them.
yeah,
but people don't have it. That's not going on, right?
No.
Like people are constantly, you and I, we deconverted, right? Technically, we should be stoned, according to the biblical terminologies here, by the people who are in our life that know that we're leading them to another god by being who we are,
Sure.
and we should be taken out and killed. They don't
But
have any
but
problem
but not
reconciling
as
they shouldn't do that.
but not well, if they're gonna stone people, we'd be in the line behind the Jehovah's Witness or the Mormons or the Catholics, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Because
right.
that would be like or God forbid, a Muslim or a Hindu. Can you
Oh
imagine?
man.
Oh,
Yeah.
the stuff that I used to believe about that. Like I remember preachers about like, "Oh, if you go to India and everybody's like following demons and blah." Like it's
Yeah.
so racist and terrible.
Which is
And
so not true. And then you go to those cultures and you begin to learn and you realize that what you were told about these things isn't true. And they believe in a very similar way to the way we believe, which is one of those quintessential facts that usually when you deconvert, you realize this. It's like the number one factor of why I believe what I believe is where I was born in the world. That's insane. I mean, simply where you're born is the number one factor in
yeah.
determining what your religion is.
And the apologists come back with that and say, well, that doesn't determine truth. Like
Sure.
if you're born in New Delhi or Jakarta, 1 + 1 still equals 2. And
Right.
when I hear that, I think you're not getting the point. Like
It's not the point. Yeah.
you're missing the point of that analogy. So
Yeah.
I actually did a video. That I published this morning about a Christian that was talking about. Well, he didn't actually identify with a Christian, although I think he was. He identifies as a theist, and he said, "Don't throw out God because your parents were bad, or you had these bad experiences, or
Right.
bad theology was taught to you, and you learned that." Maybe you learn that creationism's wrong and the earth is old, but so don't throw out God with all that. And so one of the analogies I brought up was, look, if you get a whole bunch of kids together and they all have different loving parents, so it's easy to say, like, don't throw God out because your parents were super mean and they beat you with a stick, and so
Yeah.
you're mad at God or whatever, and you throw it. It's like, okay, that's logical. But the counter to that is your parents might be very loving. Like my mom, my mom wasn't perfect. I don't idolize. She passed away some years ago,
Mm.
and probably over time she's become more of a saint. but but at the end of the day,
Yeah.
my mom was a very loving and good person. She
Yeah.
wasn't always a good mother, but she was always a loving and kind, and she was highly respected from that. So what happens if you have that? You have good loving parents, you
Yeah.
have a good home, at Christmas you get a bicycle, you have you're going to school with new pencils and a new shirt, and you feel cared for, and mommy and daddy love you, and you have good meals, and you're well nourished, and you're not lacking the basic needs of life, and your life is good. Well, that's actually puts you in a worse position to discover truth, because you don't have a challenge now. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, of course Mormonism is true. Look at how wonderful my life is. Or of course,
Right.
like Catholicism is true. Look at how wonderful my life is, or whatever it may be. So I
Yeah.
think that's actually a harder challenge. But what I was using that as an example to, you can't judge either way. It doesn't matter whether your parents are good or evil. That's not a methodology for truth, right? Like
Right.
your parent your father could be the meanest bastard on the planet, and you could end up being a star quarterback in the NFL because your father was such a maniacal, authoritarian football coach, and everything
Yeah.
he taught you was true. I mean, the guy might have been the smartest football coach on the planet, but he still might have been mean. But I don't know. I guess after you win the Super Bowl, you forgive your dad for being such a bastard. But like, those two things don't necessarily line up, because I think Christians in America tend to think that Muslim parents are like these deceptive, evil parents, right?
Right.
And the Hindu parents, you're like, well, okay, they might be nice, but they're evil and deceptive and blah 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 blah, because reason.
Sure.
And when you step back out of it and you say, wait a minute, if you're a kid growing up in a even a moderately loving home, like where like you're
Hmm.
not Eminem and you're not you're not being beat all the time or whatever. It's very hard to not accept what you're being told, regardless of what it is. And that's how that analogy, where you were born determines what you are. That's what the
Right.
analogy means. The analogy means where you were born and who your parents are. In normal circumstances, you tend to accept what they tell you.
Right.
And so
Yep.
so there you go. All right, we're coming up on an hour and a half, so I don't want to I don't want to tax either one of our minds too much, but um, can we sort of go back to our original topic? Is there anything else about um, maybe you could kind of in a nutshell go over those few things where you put people, and then
Yeah.
maybe you could give me my question to you would be, can you give me some inspiration or thoughts on how to address, because I would like to do more videos addressing, like, in fact, I'm doing this series now. I just started on called the Faithful Fridays, the divisions in Christianity. And my goal of that is kind of to show people, look, two well-educated,
Yep.
well-meaning, these are not psychopath serial killers, but one's a Catholic and one is Mike Winger, for instance, or a Mormon. And how can you possibly say I know the truth and reason when these other people that, I mean, these guys do this stuff as a career. And
Right.
how can you think that you know the truth? And I want to try to help people to question themselves and say, yeah, maybe this guy. So, going back to your experience, if you know some young adult who's maybe was met you as a kid, like, he grew up because Chris told him, Pastor Chris told me, and now you're realizing, okay, I was telling him stuff because I believed it, but why should this kid believe me any more than Pastor Joe across the street, who didn't believe in the Trinity or didn't believe
Yep.
in whatever,
Yeah, that's the challenge. And so, I think if you kind of look back, and we'll all summarize as we kind of talk about this, but um, as we look back on the reasons that people lie or seem to lie, and we talked about the intentional lies where somebody's literally actually lying, and purposely being deceptive, and then we talked about the mistakes where you're not actually lying, you're just mistaken, you're wrong,
Mhm,
and you didn't mean to be wrong, but you're wrong. And then there's the concept that you're kind of lying to yourself. You kind of think you believe it, but then there's the absolute truth position, which is where we get into that religion idea where I've had to accept the Bible as absolute truth, and I step into almost this cult dimension
mhm,
where now I've closed my mind to exploring any other truth facts that might exist outside of my realm. And I'm very dogmatic because I believe that there's this divine authority that is somehow giving these pieces. And I'm also capable of this cognitive dissonance where I can split my thoughts, have two opposing pieces, and
mhm,
I can't come out. When you think about all of that as this melting pot of issues going on with somebody who's been raised in these types of dogmatic beliefs, it's really hard to disconnect.
mhm.
So it's not like you have a magic answer to be able to come to somebody and lift the curtain up and show the wizard, right?
Yeah,
You don't always get to do that, and sometimes lifting the curtain to show the wizard is super damaging.
yeah.
And so the person's brain, just like any other person trying to leave an actual like full on cult, the person's brain is doing some active work to keep them against dropping what they're doing because of that conditioning that we all have
Mhm.
to continue the confirmation bias of this is what I already believe, and I'm going to just continue to go deeper into what I believe.
Right.
That's what you get into. So it's difficult. I What I've found that works the best for me to relay to people that I talk to now that are like, "Hey, why do you think this way? What changed?" Is to really kind of explain to them when I began to look biblically, there was a few things that I struggled with. And I couldn't answer these questions. And hell's the easiest and quickest one because
Mhm.
most Christians believe in some form of eternal punishment, or even if it's temporary punishment.
Yeah.
And I give an analogy that I've heard many others give of as a parent. There's nothing my child can do that's going to make me light them on fire.
Yeah.
And yet, God apparently loves us, but he's willing to light me on fire.
Yeah.
And that's not a reconcilable fact. That's not okay.
Yeah. It should break your heart. I mean, if that were true, you should be heartbroken
Yeah.
thinking about all of the 5 and 6 year olds that really love the wrong Jesus or the wrong God.
Yep.
Because how, I mean, their intention in their heart is true, and they're believing their parents, and they're also having an experience. Like I remember being young and really believing God was in my heart and talking to me.
Yeah.
And to think that that we would accept a God that would send a Muslim or a Hindu or Catholic or Protestant, depending on your position, to and never mind even never mind even hell. Just imagine life on earth where God would ignore most people because their
Yep.
parents gave them the wrong description. To me, that's even a worse a like a worse
Yeah.
thing. Like, would you give your kid the silent treatment because they got facts about you wrong?
Right.
I would hope not.
Because
Like,
they didn't believe you, or come
yeah, I would
on.
I would hope not, because
Yeah.
boy, the silent treatment, I got that, when I was like sort of blacklisted and demonized. Like, I got the silent treatment from a lot of people.
Yeah.
And it's very, very, very damaging and
It's rough.
extremely, extremely hurtful. And
Yeah.
this is as an adult. Eh, And I think one of the things, and this is probably from my daughter's testimony about her praying to God and not getting answers, and kind of able to make that leap that, okay, there's obviously nobody there. Like, because the other answer is he hates me, right? And I
Yeah.
think I took on the God hates me position,
Yeah.
and that plays out. Like, if you stay in the faith and you constantly realize God isn't choosing you, God's not honoring. Like, I don't have a like if you're a singer and you don't have a voice like the guy that's making albums and is everybody loves and does worship every Sunday and goes on
Right.
tour, then you have to believe God chose that person over you, and that's hurtful.
Right.
And fill in anything, whether it's you wanted to be a youth pastor or you wanted to be Billy Graham or whatever it is.
Take it to a worse level, and this is something that's personally relevant to me right now. I'm not going to share the family situation, but if a child needs a transplant of an organ and they're going to die if they don't get it, the organ transplant comes through, and then the Christians around that individual that have been praying all celebrate it and say, "Look what God did! This is amazing."
Yeah,
And they fail to understand and remember the fact that another person's child died for that organ to come to that person.
yeah,
Another person prayed to God for their kid to live,
yeah.
and God did not do anything in that situation
God didn't answer.
whatsoever.
Yeah,
The truth is, God did nothing in either situation.
right. Right.
And
But
that's
it
the reality.
but there is a very strong cognitive dissonance there, and there's a
Yes.
very it's a very disrespectful. It's like the bus crashes and your kid survived, and the
Right.
other 10 other high schooler kids either died or got seriously hurt, and you're, thank you Jesus for protecting
Yep.
my kid. I,
Yep.
I used to believe when when my kids were teenagers, of course, like every parent, I worried in the back of my mind, you can't lock your kids in the closet, they're going to go live their life, and in your mind, something could happen. And
Right.
I used to think, because I prayed for protection pretty much like every day on my knees, like, you know I felt like when I heard a tragedy, in my mind I felt, well, probably those parents didn't pray like I do. And that's a
Yeah.
very, like, I'm
Right.
ashamed to admit that's what I thought. But I had to,
Yeah.
because if I didn't think that, like, what would be the point of praying? So the only way I could justify it was that, because I'm a good parent and I actually love my kids and pray for them to the right God,
Yeah.
they're being protected. And of course, that's a very sick, very, very sick thing. But at the time, it didn't feel sick. It felt good. Like, I'm a good parent. I love my kids. And
Right.
so I guess, so going back to the question I asked you, perhaps there's ways to help people with these kind of Socratic questions, instead of saying, like I like to argue about. the empty tomb and the facts and the Bible. And I'm
Yep.
not going to stop doing that. I love it. But at the same time, I think I would also like to do more of the real emotional questions where I'm asking people, does it really seem reasonable to you that you have your young kids on the patio and you open the gate to a Doberman Pinscher with rabies and you say to yourself, well, if my kid disobeys me and gets ravaged by a dog, that's his own fault. It's free will. Like, would you do that to your kid?
Yeah.
Well, no, you'd be a terrible parent if you did that. Well, then how's that
Right.
different from what God does to us? If the story is true, he lets us wander off the cliff or swim with sharks or whatever, and he says, "Oh, well, free will." I mean, come on,
Yeah.
it's just so unfair. Well,
I think that the biggest key there, if you're looking for ways to have those kind of conversations around the emotional side of things and open up that Socratic method, you have to teach people how to think, not what to think.
yes.
And so in the analogies that you and I gave, pretty standard, pretty decent analogies, just about anybody can use them, but they fail if you're going to talk to somebody that isn't already, open to listening. If you're talking to somebody who's very close minded, you can't just sit there and give the analogy. What works a lot better is walking them to the point of the analogy.
Yeah.
Ask them the questions. Put it in their shoes. If you're, take the are you going to burn your kid example? Does this person have
Yeah.
children? You have children. Okay, we'll ask the question. What could your child ever do that would make you stop loving them?
Yeah.
Or then so you get that answer and then you take it a step further. Or what could your child ever do that would make you stick them in the basement and light them on fire?
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
just like, wait a minute. If you're not going to apply that rational standard to that situation in a way that makes sense, why are you going to change your logic when you look at God?
Yeah,
You're not going to use the same framework. It doesn't make
it's a
sense.
double standard. It's a
Yep.
double standard. And it proves, if unless you say, "Yes, I'm gonna put my kid in the basement and light him on fire," it proves that you have
Yeah.
a higher moral standard than God does. Okay, and
Exactly.
so the other thing is God didn't have to make it that way. Like,
No, that
God could have
bothers
made
me.
it different. He could have made it so that there was no discussion. There would be
Yes.
no atheists because we all knew God, and then he could have given us a clear list, and then
Yep.
he could have said, "Look, if you go out and you're a serial killer or you rape children, you're gonna go in the basement. I'm gonna burn you."
Right.
And I think most of us rational people would say, "Yeah, okay, that might be a little harsh, but I'm not gonna rape any kids, or I'm not gonna
Sure.
pillage, and so okay, I can live with those rules." But uh, if God said, if you eat pork, I'm going to send you to hell, and we knew that it was absolutely 100% positive, well, fine. So going back
Yeah.
to my brother who lives in Indonesia, his son, my nephew, got arrested for possession of weed. And my brother's like, "Yeah, look, I don't think weed's a big deal, but if you live in Indonesia, you don't touch drugs. You drink all you want." Like, I mean, you can do a lot of stuff in Indonesia, but drugs is not one of the things you can do. So, but it was a good point, right? So if
Yeah.
God was fair about these things and God said, "Look," and I know fundamentalists would say, "Yeah, God gave us the Bible. He did say these." Well, come on. We can't,
No.
that we don't agree. That's
We
the whole
don't agree
point
that
here.
that's the source of truth.
We
Sorry.
don't agree it's the source of truth, and we don't, even if you and I were Christians right now and we were
Yeah.
talking about any theology, the chance that we'd agree on everything would be almost zero.
That's a
Um,
huge issue. It's not that he gave us a book. No, no, no. It's your interpretation of a book that was, by the way, interpreted by other people
yeah,
who also got it from other people who compiled it from a group of books who all were just kind of voted on to figure out, well, this one feels like it should fit and this one doesn't.
yeah,
I mean, come on. That's it's not reasonable. It's not
yeah.
reasonable in any way, shape, or form.
Yes, it's not reasonable at all. And having come from that belief system, you and I can both understand why people don't accept that it's not reasonable. Like, I
Yeah.
can
Right.
totally empathize with that. And one of my frustrations is, how do I help people see what I see so they can question for themselves? Not
Right.
so they can become atheists, not so they can change. Like, I don't care if they go to church or be a Christian, but at least it goes back to what you said before. if they just come out and said, I believe based on faith, and I can read the book and I know Adam and Eve is not reasonable. I know Noah's Ark's not reasonable.
Mhm.
And I know that I know applying these old standards to today's democratic, so we live in a republic, or we live in modern times and we have more information. We don't have to follow these rules and yada yada yada. But I still believe, for whatever cultural reason. Well, okay, fine. I can accept that. I don't really agree with it still, but it's
Yeah.
that's a lot different than when you're out proselytizing and you're out telling little children they're going to go to hell if they don't agree, which to me that's the hard part.
It
So,
is.
all right, well, I know I'm getting a little mentally fatigued. I know.
We've been at it for a while.
Yeah, so but this has been an amazing discussion, and I hope that if you're willing, we'll do this again
Yeah.
as you're building up a new channel, and if people see this down the road, hopefully whatever, even months or down the road, they can check you out and see how you're doing and give you some support and love. And I hope people will keep following me. Like I'm almost about to hit 400 followers. Yay. um,
Yeah, that's great.
but I mean, it
Getting up
starts
there.
somewhere. You got to
Yeah.
start somewhere. And I'm really enjoying this. And at the end of the day, I hope to be helpful to the type of person that I speak to, my style or whatever, like my sense of humor or the way that I put things into word. I hope that some people going through the questioning and the the beginning process of deconstruction, because I think deconstruction applied to anything, religion, politics, what you should eat, how you should live, how you should spend your days, how you should treat your kids. If you're not questioning every one of those things,
Yeah.
then you're not living the optimal life, because there's no way you got it right when you were 7 years old.
There's
No
no
way.
way.
There's no way.
And you
So
should be always reevaluating.
always
Always.
reevaluate. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And as you get older, like me, like I'm an old guy, and I say, okay, well, what what parts of my life do I want to continue doing, and what parts of my life do I want to cut off?
Yep.
And you can't do that if you're not continually evaluating your life. And I'm like,
Hmm.
my life's far
It's
from
very true.
perfect. But I do a lot of dumb stuff, generally centered
Don't we
around
all?
eating carbohydrates, which is my downfall. But um, so, all right. Well, Chris, it was a pleasure meeting you in like online and sort of like this.
Yes. Absolutely.
Let's keep talking and let's maybe plan something down the road as you decide kind of what you're doing with your channel. I don't know if you have something you want to pitch. Do you have some idea of what you're gonna do?
It's really going to focus on the deconversion process that I went through. What constructing faith looks like, and then probably talking a lot about some of the same points that most of us get into, which is let's look at some of these guys out there that are talking that are misrepresenting, what atheism is, because that's one of those most prolific things I noticed in all the conversations that I had was there's a real lack of understanding from anybody who's in the world of Christianity over what we're actually defining as our terms. And I think
Right.
it's really important that we understand each other and have defined terms. So I'll probably
That's a
focus a
big
lot on
one.
that.
Like, we don't have to agree on everything, but if we don't understand what we're talking about, we're not even having a real discussion.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
We have to be at that number one. So I'm going to focus a lot on my own personal things that I've walked through for my channel, and hopefully have some videos coming out before too long here. It takes
Yeah,
me a
keep
minute
working
to
on
get
it.
them
Well,
going, but yeah,
let me make this offer right now. If you're interested, is when you do get into
yeah,
that and you start doing, I'm assuming you want to do some interviews. I have not told my deconversion story yet. I do plan on doing it for myself on my own channel, but I think it's a lot more interesting when it's not a monologue. So like I could do a
yeah,
3-hour discussion talking just to the camera, but
yeah.
I really I think you and I have enough of a common experience and enough of a mutual understanding of the process we went through that you would ask very good questions. So eh, if you would think about giving me the honor of being an interviewee on your channel of me, I would love to talk about, because I do think people really like those. I think they
I
speak
think
to
so too.
people. I
Yeah,
think they speak to people
yeah,
because they can identify with at least part of the story, and we can, having come through that, we can tell in a way that's honest about how we felt as a Christian, like how I really love Jesus and how I prayed in tongues and prayed
exactly.
for healing and things I believed. And I think it's very hard for somebody to listen to me talk about that and then say, no, you're lying. You were play acting for decades. Like,
Yeah.
to me, that just, come on, don't, like,
They're going to
I,
rationalize it in their own head, however they're going to
yeah,
rationalize it. But it's hard when you get a personal story
yeah,
to
come
tell
on. It's
somebody they're
like
wrong.
you really think when I was 10 years old or 11 years old, and when I got baptized and all that,
Yep.
you think that I was faking that? And
Right.
if you don't think I was faking it, what you have to then rationalize is that God knew I would later deconvert, so God rejected me as a 10-year-old. Well, I
Yeah.
mean, then it just comes back to the Calvinist position, which yeah,
It's super messy.
yeah, it's super messy. All right, man. I super
Excellent.
appreciate this. I
Absolutely.
loved our chat. Have a great day, and we'll be in touch. Everybody that's been following along, or anyone that listens in the future to this, like, subscribe, check out Chris's channel as he builds it, and I appreciate your guys' support.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys.
Adios. All right, bye bye.
Bye.